today we're delighted to have Hasmig Boyajian join us. Hasmik owns Planet LA and brings over 18 years of full service event planning experience, specializing in both social and corporate events. She brings a wealth of knowledge as a result of her extensive career and dedication to understanding the unique needs of her diverse clientele. Her passion for inclusion and creative event design make her a standout in the industry. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Me too. So let's kick it right off. Why don't you give us a sort of synopsis of your career? How did you start and where did that journey lead you to where you are now?
It all started when I was trying to figure out what I want to do with my life when I grow up in high school. And one of the things that always carried with me was planning parties and more so wanting to know what's going on in the background. So as I started researching colleges and whatnot, went to school at Cal Poly Pomona to the Collins College of Hospitality Management, got my bachelor's degree in hospitality management, during which I worked in all areas of the hospitality business. So, restaurants, hotels, clubs, you name it, I've done it, as well as working in large scale events on campus and throughout the industry because our professors were so well connected. Straight out of college, got a job as a director of catering and events at a restaurant in Pasadena, worked there for about 5 years, then went off on my own and have been on my own for the last 18-ish years or so, something like that. So it's been fun and done a lot of events, different styles, large and small scale, and now more focused on corporate and social.
Love that. And with those, 18 years of experience within planning, what have been maybe some of the key lessons that you've learned about creating impactful and engaging experiences for both, social and corporate clients?
So the foundation for me personally, especially post-pandemic in this business, has been to focus on service and seeing your client for what they're, how you can best help them. When clients come to us, we're here to solve their problems and take away the stress that goes with making a million decisions and planning events. So some of the key things is obviously understanding what the client's objectives are, what they're looking to get out of the event. If it's a corporate event, what is their intention, what purpose, who is their audience, those types of things. And what experiences do they want their attendees to have? And this is both in social as well as corporate, where we typically walk through the event with the client, especially if we're at the venue, to make them see and understand, tease the senses, the sight, the smell, the taste, so that they can really feel what it is that they want to feel, and what it's important to them. We also ask our clients to give us a list of priorities of what really matters to them, what they don't want to, deal with. And this also helps us with planning the budget so that we know, certain, food might be a priority for the clients if it's, let's say, a culinary client, right? So we want to make sure that their expectations align with the budget, and we also that helps us plan a better event for them. Um, and the final thing is to surprise and delight the client. Although we talk about the basics and everything that we're going to do, we like to level it up a little bit and try to add a little bit of either it be nostalgia or something unexpected, something a little more branded, different things to entice them even more and really shine when we know what is important to them. So.
Yeah. Have you seen a sort of trend or any patterns with some of the things that may not be as I guess common or maybe like you would obviously guess people would prioritize, like you said, and if it's a culinary client, like food, have you heard of any sort of requests or priorities that either are patterns that, normally you wouldn't imagine would be so, or just that kind of like stood out to you as like, wow, interesting that you prioritize that?
So it really varies, but I like to simplify their request. So, for example, we did an event where the only request from my client was to add science and technology into their event. In our industry, when you talk about science and technology, it's very LED lights and camera and sound and whatnot, but it's not really like, yes, there's science behind it, but in order to put it in a room with a bunch of engineers and scientists, as was my client, it was a little bit challenging. So after extensive research, I put the simple concepts of science. So we used levitation. We had small levitating centerpieces where a group of 10 people were sitting and trying to figure out how this thing was levitating, where it's like two magnets and it's basic elementary science. But because of the way that I set everything up, now I have this whole group project of how do we get this centerpiece to levitate again because it fell and that was the intention. So that was one really cool way of taking a complex idea potentially and simplifying it to make it impactful. And another thing we did was we had a holographic entrance for one of our events, and the machine that the vendor we found, we were able to create this effect where people were walking through fog, which they thought they were going to get wet. And again, it was the same engineers and scientists. So it was cool because they walk through the fog and they're not getting wet. So people are touching this thing and they're like, oh, how does it get done? And, wanting to know the science behind it. So it was really cool to take a challenge of implementing the science and technology into a simple concept versus trying to create this whole complicated thing just because we were trying to incorporate two simple things in it. So I find oftentimes when the crazier the idea, sometimes you really need to reverse engineer it and simplify it and say, okay, how did the clown jump out of the box? Well, there's a bungee or whatever in there. So we don't get a lot of crazy ideas because oftentimes people don't know what they want. And that's where our research comes in. And we also, once we talk to our clients, it's trying to see like how much risk are they willing to take with certain events, depending on the impact they're trying to make, of course, with the budget that they have as well.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fascinating. There's always, the name of the show is Activate Your Audience. And a lot of these things,
Right.
as you mentioned the sentence earlier, there are activating different components of an individual, a person, and a group of people's, sense of self, their body, their emotions, their
Exactly.
mind. And so stimulating that, you put it, I think, very, very poignantly, like it's not always this complex thing, even if it's a complex idea. Oftentimes what's going to stick, and especially in a room full of people where there's already sensory input, right? Even if it's a bland meetup, just meeting people and being around people is naturally stimulating to most of our nervous system. And
Right.
so if you're going to have a whole show, a whole production, I think the most effective ones that do actually help people remember it, help people, as you said, meet these goals for whoever the end client is,
Hmm.
whoever the event is, are those that incorporate simplicity. So I'm so glad that you brought that up.
Right. Yeah, in
Now,
today's day and age, you have to really, because there's so many different types of people nowadays, you really have to be mindful of that as well. Where like, having a club scene is not gonna make everybody happy, especially in the days of like we're overloading on information. I always joke and say, when we go to conferences, it's like, let's go to this party, let's go to that party. I'm like, why don't they make it a sleeping party so people go to bed at 8 o'clock and not complain that they're tired the next day for the 8 o'clock class? So they haven't done
so
that
true.
yet, but we'll see.
Maybe you'll be the first to create a nap time, right? A nap
Yeah.
time activation. That's just amazing. I'd be up for that.
Google
Now,
actually has sleeping pods.
something like that, right?
They're so cool. Yeah.
How do you activate that though? That'd be a real challenge in simplicity, right? Now, with again the range of events that you have, these are large scale events, sometimes intimate events, um, thousands of attendees, sometimes just a small gathering. How do you approach the experience design? So you mentioned earlier, simplifying things, but when it comes to these goals or even, making sure that an event, some of them will replicate what the previous event, had, but how do you go about sort of introducing these elements of event design across these different type of events?
So, it comes down to the simplicity again of talking to the client, right? And also asking the hard questions of what worked and what didn't work last year. Oftentimes, we do a debrief in the event prior if we were the ones doing it the years before. And I always take notes on my end to see like, oh, this worked, this went smoothly, this didn't go smoothly. But in terms of trying to create an experience, we also hold within our own company and within our own peers and our networks, because I have a fairly large network. So we do think tanks, we do brainstorming sessions, build off of, what if you did this? What if you had a bunch of treadmills in a conference instead of chairs, for example? How would that work out? Would it be too loud? Different things like that, so that it's taking everyday little elements that people want to do, especially with health and wellness being at the forefront in a lot of events these days, especially for corporate, and spinning it so that it's doable, and making it a walking session where people have headphones on and walking and listening to the keynote instead of just sitting there and staring at their walls or playing with their phones. And we also one of the elements I like to add is nostalgia also in different events to create the experience. For example, we did an event a few weeks ago where we used thrifty ice cream. I don't know if you're familiar with thrifty ice cream. So it's an LA thing, I guess, where back in the day we used to go to it's like Rite Aid pharmacy, but it's the thrifty right now. I mean, it was thrifty, now it's Rite Aid. But you would go and get ice cream from there because that's like the thing to do. And they have these special ice cream scoops. So we scooped ice cream with those original ice cream scoops in 7 different flavors. And the stories we heard of all the guests, and they're like, oh my gosh, haven't had this flavor in years. And so it was like tantalizing the senses, the taste, the mind, the heart, and those kinds of things, where such a small, cheap idea, because we didn't have a big budget, it was a fundraiser, versus going to like the craft ice cream, whatever. So I'm like, you know what? This could be a hit or miss because it's ice cream. And it was awesome because I got to hear stories from the 19 whatevers, from like old people telling me all these fun stories that their parents used to take them. So it really touched home. So it made people experience it in so many different levels that I didn't even expect. I was like, oh, it's ice cream. They'll enjoy it. They'll have fun. But it was one of those things where I personally like sit down and walk myself through the event. Like I close my eyes and I envision everything to say like, okay, I'm going to walk in, what's going to happen and all the details. So it's really immersing yourself in what the experience you want to happen, or at least the feelings. So you kind of build again, and it's pretty simple. It goes back to the same things of talking to the client and also presenting them with ideas that will be out of the box and will challenge them to think about like, oh, we can't do that. That's too scary. What if this reaction happens? What if that reaction happens? But that's the only way you learn about the comfort level of the client and the risks they're willing to take. And then you kind of just communicate as much as you can so that you get to a product that everybody is happy with.
Yeah. And you bring up two, I think, meshing points with that, which you mentioned earlier of just how much risk can they tolerate, right? But
Hmm.
also there's risk from you, right, as a producer and as a team to also try stuff like you said. The ice cream thing may or may not work. It's ice cream. Who knows? Maybe it's
Right.
with health and wellness, maybe with whatever the situation is. You have to take those risks, and then the most important part is like that third component that brings it together in how to move forward, which is you do those debriefs, right? You look at what that
Right.
risk was and you reassess what worked. And so it's this sort of dance, like most things worth doing. It requires a bit of tension, and it
Hmm.
requires you having the courage, hopefully having clients that will share that courage with you. But even if they don't, as a producer, also taking note of, sometimes you take a risk and they don't work, and that's sort of, the cliche of trying, and regardless if you fail, you still win something as long as you sort of assess it and debrief, right?
Exactly. Absolutely. What's the worst that's going to happen? They're going to say, no, we don't like the idea. Okay, so what is it that you don't like? And, I'm here for working for them, trying to create an experience that they envision. So sometimes they do want to play it safe, maybe because the prior year when they had somebody else, it didn't go so well. So now they're like, okay, let's get back to our roots. That's always an option. And sometimes always the better thing, because as we try to get like more creative and do different things, sometimes if it gets too far away from the message or too far away from the root, it's so much better and more impactful to come back and say, okay, let's start from ground zero and see where we're at. Why are we doing this? You know, and I think nowadays, especially with the diverse crowds that we get, the intentionality of everybody doesn't like loud music, for example, so maybe have some quiet spaces for some people who can listen to certain things with headphones versus being in the room, with the boom, boom, boom. And also just um, maybe toning the event down in size just to be more impactful, especially if it's a fundraiser, for example, sometimes, our clients want to be involved in the planning as well as the fundraising. So I also draw clear lines on what is expected of who, so that and if you're the CEO of the company, spend money talking to your guests so that they spend money on you, excuse me, versus like worrying about, oh, is the catering out, whatever. Like that's what we're here for, to make sure the logistics, everything goes smoothly and you take care of your people so that they support you. So it's very much a collaboration, even though we're hired as planners to execute and produce these events. But it's so important to listen and understand, because each organization is unique, as well as each person you're dealing with. Like every year when we deal with different board members, different managers, or whoever is responsible for different departments in the same company, could be so different. The dialogue, the communication, we try to take the time up front to have these long meetings where they might not want to have them at times because it's another meeting. Yes, but if we don't do this, then the communication is going to go. I don't want to assume things as I'm planning and trying to figure things out. I would rather know, oh, I spoke to them, and it's like UCLA is blue and gold, USC is burgundy and gold. Like you can't mix the colors. You know what I'm saying? So it's just really important to have those long, difficult discussions in the front end, so that when we're done, it's like, wow, you actually listen to what I'm saying. Like that's what we're here for.
Yeah. And it takes almost a leveled up, I think, empathetic experience, right? So oftentimes we get into this space because we are, or we're even good at it because of that empathetic nature, right? Being able to, as you said, visualize what is the experience that XYZ person or the audience as a whole or your, average guest is going to have. And those are different experiences sometimes. Maybe in certain areas, they're the same experience for all stakeholders. Every different stakeholder sometimes have different experiences. And so the team having that sort of ability to empathize and to put themselves in their shoe is one part. And as you mentioned, the other part of that, like the lever up, I would say, is like then also knowing what the being empathetic to the goal, right? So being empathetic to maybe the company's mission or the organization's mission or this project's mission. And those are these little nuances that I think comes from that experience, right? And it all ties to some aspect in terms of that's the idea, that's the philosophy, but then the operation of that, the execution of that is, as you said, it comes from sometimes folks not really knowing what it is they want, but still, you having that ear, you having that empathy, caring enough to, I understand, but again, they hire you as a pro, even if it's a collaboration, there's also different levels of how much they'll collaborate. Some people do want to be hands-on, some people can't help but be hands-on, even though it's not even good for everybody oftentimes. And so it's having that sort of, again, art and dance of like knowing, okay, this is how involved they want to be. This is how involved they don't want to be, what we need them to be. And regardless of what that meshes to, as you said, we're there for servicing them. We're here to alleviate hopefully some of that bandwidth, some of that stress, deliver a great experience. But then you also have to sometimes give them, like we've quoted it before on here, that Henry Ford quote, like people would be asked what they wanted, they say a faster buggy or a faster horse. And sometimes you have to be the professional that says, in certain ways, maybe not exactly, maybe verbatim, you don't know what you want, but here, you hired me for that, and I'm listening. We're gonna get to the end goal regardless, right?
100%. I'm very direct when it comes. There are different levels at which uh the song and dance goes, right? Because the song always comes to an end or somebody falls. And so our job is to make sure nobody falls. But if I have to make someone fall in a nice dancing way, that doesn't make sense. But anyways, what I'm saying is there's a level at which we have to have boundaries as well, because I know people mean well, and they're so, depending on the job and depending on the client and the project, they may be used to doing so many things where they're not sure how to delegate certain tasks. And over the years, that's why it has become so critical to really draw the line of column A is me, column B is you. This is what worked last year. This is what didn't work. If you need volunteers for registration, or are we going to pay someone to manage registration if we have a large event? So these are the things where people don't realize that uh, it's okay to admit that we dropped the ball here and we did good here. Even for my own personal events, like when I do a debriefing with the clients, I'm always observing as I'm there. I'm always there. I never leave the floor. And it's like, okay, this is, what we're doing great. This is what's not working. So if I could prevent a fire on the spot, I will obviously do it. But at the same time, it's a note immediately where, okay, this is why it didn't go well. This is what we could have done. If it's a complicated scenario, we do test runs, we practice, we make sure my staff is aware of what's going on, why we're doing certain things the way that we're doing. And yeah, it's really a partnership no matter what the size of the project is, because we want to make sure that our clients look good. We want to make sure that the guests have a wonderful experience, and we want to make sure that the following year, whether we are the planners or not, the participants want to come back and enjoy whatever it is that we're doing. I live by the philosophy of always leave somebody better than you found them. So I always try to educate more so. Sometimes if they don't want and they don't know that they need this information, but it has happened a lot where, oh, happy you told me this because now I know, you know this is what I need to look for. um, and also with all of that, having professional and strong vendors to make sure that everything goes hand in hand, and that dance is done professionally, so it's not like a pop-up dance. It's really orchestrated well. Everybody is working hand in hand. I can't stress enough how important it is to have qualified, experienced vendors who know what they're doing and are able to like think on their feet and get things done without, showing that there's something wrong, which doesn't happen
Exactly.
often.
Yeah. No, that's again, like you mentioned it, that is a dance and it's part of this creative process, almost sort of, I think our brain works as
Hmm.
producers or like, high level executioners is we know there is this sort of art to it, this sort of human, creative, sometimes again more artistic element, but it's requiring this sort of right brain like type A about certain things and very analytical sort of the project management versus the creative brain mesh, right?
Right,
And
right,
that sort of builds within the people that you're working with as vendors and within the conversation you're having with the clients, or even with some of these strict boundaries. Like you can have the most beautiful idea, but if you're also not giving everybody, whether it's a client or, other stakeholders or vendors, their specific role, that's where ambiguity and more unnecessary risk comes in. So I love that you
right.
mentioned that idea of not just on the client side, but on your vendor side, on your team side, being clear about what is expected of who and why, and having that communication as a leader, right? Like that empathy, I'm sure doesn't just stop at your people or at the guest and at the
Right.
client, but it extends to your people to be able to properly lead all these
Hmm.
components that, no one person can do on their own.
Oh, absolutely. I actually hear it a lot from smaller vendors that uh, they're going to an event, they're hired for it, and they don't know, where they're going, what they're doing. I'm like, well, get the information. This is something that as a planner, at least the planners that I know that I've worked with, like we make sure that the vendors that are crucial to the timeline have the timeline. They know where parking is, they know what to dress. You're not allowed to smoke and drink on the clock with me. Like, there's these types of things where people sometimes assume people know. I'm like, no, they don't, because one planner might be okay with people showing up in jeans and a t-shirt, and another one will be like, yeah, that's just not going to fly. Go home and change. Like, and that's me. But you have to, because whoever I hire is going to make me look good and vice versa, and all of us together make the client look good. So, when you're working at a certain level and really trying to level up, level up, level up, and just provide a better service and experience for my client, um, this is the most important thing for me. So that if a client goes to a vendor and asks them a question, it's not a I don't know. It's either a let me find out or this is what the answer is. So it's these little things that I think COVID kind of took away the service aspect of it, and that's why it's
Mhm.
like even more important for me now. Because in as we started, now that events are back for the most part, as it was coming back, I was like, why is this element missing? What am I missing here? Why are we not like wanting to work with people?